Afternoon. As we continue to work on our budget, we were going to do the mayor's preliminary budget early in July. We're going to move that to the end of July because of different challenges we have. But Mike and the team felt it was really important to sit down and have some discussions just about policy and ideas that we do in financing. There's some assumptions that the budget team makes as we go into a budget, and we just wanted to rediscuss those with you as a team. I know each one of you have had meetings with the staff and with the budget team up to this point. I think we'd have to agree. I think we're very transparent in the budget this year. We're keeping you fully informed of what's happening. So we Susan wanted to go over some things as well as Mike. And you can see a lot of our staff is here too, because they kind of want to see where our policies might end us or where we're headed. So the idea of today's meeting is basically more of a policy discussion and or recognition of the challenges that we're having with this year's budget and maybe some solutions that we're looking for. But it was more asking for input again from the commissioners of and or where you want to go on certain items and policy decisions that you feel that you'd really like us to keep in mind as we do the budget, as I bring the budget forth in 2 weeks. So this is kind of one more time, let's have another discussion, and we're going to have our team kind of explain what they're following. Brenda's up to speed now and kind of how we do different things, and then get a little bit of feedback from you before I do the final budget, which we will present to you in 2 weeks. Michael?
Well, thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. Thank you for your time today. We sincerely appreciate it. We thought this would be a great informal opportunity to sit around the table and just share with you some of the early information that we've assembled on the budget. But before we do that, and before we talk about 2024, we thought it was important to look also at how we have been performing in 2023. We know that's a direct request of the commissions. We want to support that. And we're going to talk about what we're looking like right now as we move through 2023. So really an early priority of mine as your city administrator is to bring the commission together around some common data, common information, so that you start the budget process for 2024 from the same vantage point. So you've got the information that you need to have a meaningful budget dialogue as we move forward with the 2024 deliberations. We've also wanted to spend a little time today with you to talk about a new status reporting format. Jordan will talk to that in a bit. This is directly responding to commissioners and the interest in trying to understand on a more quarterly or monthly basis how we are doing, how we're looking. We want to just run a couple of ideas by you and get your perspectives and thoughts on that. So we've got a lot of topics to cover today, but we thought it was important to start really first with the past. Susan Thompson, our interim finance director, is here to talk about the recent completion of the 2022 ACFR. That's the financial report for 2022. And I want to have Susan speak to that first and acknowledge her work, her team's work. The finance team is assembled here today. Susan will introduce them briefly. And following that, we're going to talk about how 2023 is looking. And then finally, we'll talk about projections and what we're looking like for 2024 and want to get your input and ideas on revenue strategies as well as expenditure strategies. So with that, I'll turn it over to Susan. Thank you again for your time.
Hi, good morning. As most of you know, I'm pretty new to my role. However, I'm not new to the city. Worked at the Fargo Dome, and I worked with the finance team for many years. And I just, as Michael mentioned, they're here today. I just wanted to point them out because a lot of them are fairly new. They lost some senior leadership over the last several years, and a lot of them have stepped up. They really kept the bills getting paid, revenues coming in, and I just think that we all owe them a lot of gratitude for their hard work the last few years. One of the things that they just completed is the annual comprehensive financial report for 2022. Wyatt, one of our senior managers, is sick today. I'm slightly suspicious, but he said he was sick today. He was going to present this part. But they worked very hard on this. That's also in conjunction with our audit, which is through Eide Bailly. So we'll have copies of these for you to take home if you'd like to look at. And then Eide Bailly has been meeting the last few years with commissioners as you have questions on an individual basis, and Wyatt's going to be setting that up forthcoming probably the 24th, the day of your next meeting. So I just, as Michael mentioned, we wanted to kind of start with the past. And since I'm new, I'm also using this as an opportunity to educate myself. So I wanted to look through kind of the general fund reserves, because I know that was a question that has been being discussed. So for your ease, I found the kind of silver bullet of the packet, page 129, in case you're interested. This is what talks about the general fund reserves, and it's the history, 2018 through 2022. So the general fund reserves is a group of accounts, and we've also listed the definitions. So the one I think that most people are interested in is the unassigned, which is the one that's kind of available. And as you can see by the highlighted, the reserve has kind of fluctuated. It's gone up in the middle, and then it's now actually below what it's been in earlier pre-COVID. So we've had people ask about the 25% policy. There is no such thing, actually. There's nothing been codified as policy. It's a management kind of best practice. And the policy was 25% of annual appropriations. So if we use that methodology, currently we would be at 20%. So as we were talking about that, I thought we should maybe look a little bit more on reserves, and if in fact it is your desire to have a policy, then that's something you might want to direct us to work on, or we could work on together. Earlier I had given you the article, Rethinking Our Reserves, which I think all of you said you enjoyed reading. I put together some additional information based on that, and I have a packet for you as well in here, but it has a draft policy. The article that we talked about really mentions kind of two things. First, it says that we should be looking at our reserves more as an insurance policy and not as a savings account. So to do that, you really have to look at your risks, and each community is going to have a different set of risks, economic, weather-related, if we have a lot of debt, those types of things. So there is also a worksheet that it referred to that we can identify kind of what our risks are. And then I found a case study that the city of Colorado Springs used, and it gives kind of some real examples of how they incorporated that. So I wanted to make sure that you have that, and that's something that we can do some additional conversation on later. The next page, though, I wanted to show you kind of how this all flows together. So we have the reserves, and where do those numbers come from? So I had to pull this from 5 different ACFRs, and it lists the 2018, 19, 20, 21, and 22 revenues and expenditures. And then those trickle down to the fund balance, which then ties to those fund balances on the first page. So as we mentioned, what this shows is that the fund balance has decreased. But as I was looking at this, there were 2 kind of complications. Number one is that this is inconsistent. For example, transit was in the general fund, then in 2021 it moved to an enterprise fund, so we're kind of not looking at apples to apples. But the main thing that I think complicates this, and then I'm going to be doing a little more work on, is that all of the CARES funding flowed through the general fund. The revenues are that big bump in intergovernmental revenue in 2020. And then the related expenses that we've incurred so far that relate to the general fund are also in the expenditures, but they could be in 2020, they could be in 21, or they can be in 22. And then if we transferred any money to a different fund, again, those would be in the transfers. And then anything that we haven't spent is still in the general fund at the bottom. So that doesn't really give us, I don't think, a good picture of where we are. So what I tried to do starting this weekend, which was too short of time, is kind of pick out all the CARES money so that we can get an actual look at where these different departments and revenues and expenditures are kind of on a neutral basis. So we'll be working on that, and I would promise to get back to you on that and kind of show you what we've found on that. So that's where I are as far as my kind of research on the past. Anybody have any questions or discussion points?
Mr. Chair, I have a question. So Susan, in 2020, on page 2, the third line down or fourth line down, intergovernmental revenues, that 41 million, is that the federal money that was dispersed, the majority of that, or is that where that number is?
That was all of the CARES money, and that was about, it was 15 million and some odd dollars. So that flowed in there. But it didn't all get spent in 20. In fact, it's not all spent.
Right.
So but it's hard to pick out where they are without doing a lot more detail.
But obviously not all of it, but that's where a lot of money came in from during COVID, correct?
Correct. And then the ARP money came in a totally different fund and was accounted for through that fund.
Okay, thank you.
Susan, if I could ask, so the reserve balance in 2022, that included the 8 million that we pulled from that?
Pardon me?
So the 8 million that was deficit from 2022, that was pulled from the reserve fund. Is that reflected in the 21 million?
Yes. Jordan tells me yes. Yes, that's how they all funnel down. If you look, all the different net changes in fund balances, it's kind of almost to the bottom of the page. But yes, those
Okay.
pluses
Yeah.
and minuses all affect the end of the fund balance.
My question was related to that decision was made in 2023, but it actually reflected the books in 2022. Yeah, okay.
So you would ask for a financial update. We had a discussion whether it should be done monthly or quarterly. Finance wants to explain this a little bit to you, what format you might see as commissioners and/or the variability in it that comes with it. Quarterly is probably more accurate. The monthly will be a little bit up and down because of variables, but go ahead.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to be explaining the page 3. This is my first pass at a financial report I could get you quarterly that would be a deeper analysis on top of the monthly reports that are already being included in the consent agendas. So I will first walk through just what this is doing, and then what we would prepare additional on top of the monthly reports, and then kind of the caveats, and then I'll ask for your input on the end to see if you guys want anything. Okay, so the first 3 columns are the through June 2023. This is the stuff you would normally receive every month. That's just the year-to-date budget calculation, the actual expenses, and then a calculated variance. So on top of that, every 3rd month, I would give you the remaining budget, which just takes the total annual budget and subtracts out what's been allocated for, in this case, January through June. And then the estimated ending balance, which would take your actual expenses plus the remaining budget to kind of give you an estimated ending. In addition, so we will have this variables column to the far right. That is going to mainly be items that we in finance are aware of that might be fluctuating, but we haven't done a deep dive and haven't formally brought an adjustment to finance and commission. So those are just numbers kind of to use for your reference that things might be changing. We will also do, if you notice on the far left, there's, I put little tick marks next to the row titles, and those correspond to discussion points we will prepare on the very bottom. So those will highlight if there's weird trends or changes, just any sort of, when we do this deeper analysis, things that we think you guys should be aware of. So overall, again, like I said, the Century Code has to give you, we have to give you monthly statements. So we'll continue to do that, but every 3rd month would have this deeper analysis. And then the things we want to make sure you're aware of when we're doing this sort of format is that 2 major things. Especially in the expenses, the annual budget is just allocated evenly over 12 months. So whereas, snow and mowing, you're not moving snow in July and you're not mowing in January, but it's just evenly split up on all of the accounts. So going forward, we're going to try and be more mindful of those and actually allocate things out, especially if it's a major expense, make sure it's allocated into the proper months. And then the other big thing to know is that the budget is constantly changing. Every finance committee and then the following commission meeting, the budget, we could add or subtract everything. So, but each quarter that would be updated through that time. And in relation to that, we're also going to try and formalize the budget adjustment process more. I have a draft report template that is going to have to be included in every request. So it will just help us in finance department move more efficiently. We don't have to go have a bunch of back and forth with departments to see what their intent was. It'll be just cleaner. And that'll be implemented hopefully before the end of the year. So with that being said, how do you have any input on this format? Anything for me?
I think, John, you and Arlette had some concerns. Does this look pretty good?
Yeah, what I'm most interested in, and related to the fact that the budget, both revenue and expenses have been just divided by 12, that the estimated ending balance is what I would look at most closely. So I certainly appreciate that. So it looks like here, we'll end up with slightly $1,000 over expenses. Is that correct?
Yes, as the numbers sit right now, and two, so these are shown in thousands, but, so as the numbers are right now, yes, I will tell you, I haven't entered all of the budget adjustments that have approved thus far. And yes, like I said, that's just right now, assuming no other changes for the
And then
rest of the
those
year.
variables in the far right column are kind of always hanging out there. And as they firm up, we'll adjust them, on a quarterly basis. But those things will have an effect on the final balance.
So we shouldn't be surprised by another $8 million deficit is my concern here.
I'm not going to say that out loud. I hope not.
Hopefully.
But
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. And can you also speak to the limitations with current software that finance has, and some of the reporting challenges?
Thank you. As I mentioned, when I was working on the sheet yesterday here by myself, I felt like I was working on a mainframe from high school. I mean, it's literally a black screen, and you're doing F2s, F8s. I was trying to trace the CARES monies through the project code, but it's literally like lines, and they don't all trace to each other. Like you can't hit a dot and see the history of the transaction. So I am new to this role, but I was involved in the ERP. We'll talk about that at the commission meeting tonight, but I've been on the planning, as has Jordan and a few of our team members. And those are the kinds of things we asked in our demo. How transparent is this going to be? How easy is this going to be to pull different reports? That will go a long, long way to helping us be more transparent and get easier reports for you.
And basically with that software, there'll be much up to date because all the transactions will run through it. So when they actually give you a monthly report, it should be really accurate as to what's been spent, and what we're bringing in, so.
Well, I understand and know it's our practice to do averaging over 12 months' time for expenses and line items. The feedback I've gotten from some other folks is they don't do that, and they're wondering why we do that. Even though we have, but do we have to going forward?
No, we don't, but we have thousands and thousands of accounts that will require us to go in and enter 12 times to divide that out. The new software, I believe, we'll have to do that anyway, but like for things like forecasts, we can say, oh, I want all the utilities to go up by 2%, 3%. It'll help us model different things easier. And then it will also make the budget to actual much more accurate.
I'm guessing you would prefer budget to actual.
Absolutely.
Yes.
That's what we did at the Fargo Dome. If we didn't know what month the concert would come in, but when we firmed it up, we would true it up so that the concert tied with the budget concert. Same thing with like tax revenues are the biggest one. They all come in February, a little bit comes later. Well, if you don't amortize that out by 12 months, you're going to be off every single month. So you just need to do that, or these are not meaningful at all to you. In fact, they might be even more harmful because you're not interpreting correctly.
So we're okay going forward? Pleased with this, or?
Could I ask one more question?
Yes.
So as I understand, last year we ran into a problem with one-time one-time revenue sources on the revenue side. That's been all cleaned up with this?
With the budget, yes, we'll be talking about that a little more in the future section.
All right.
One other thing with this, though, the next page, page 4, is just a cheat sheet Jordan put together, because as we had our meetings earlier, there were a lot of questions on kind of what flows to which account. You know, so you can see what actually is included in taxes. It's not just taxes, it's franchise fees, what comes with charges for services versus fines and tickets. So this is kind of a resource for you. And then same with the expenditures, what departments fall into what bucket. And you can always reach out to us if you have further questions.
Susan,
I'm sorry. I think I wasn't real clear with my question. My question isn't related to the budget. It's related to this year's projected ending balance. And if there are any one-time sales in there that we may not see. Yes, it was my more clear question.
There, in the variables column, that 3.3 million, I believe that's a sale that may or may not happen.
Okay.
So, yes. So that is on the radar.
a basic question about practice, and it's not, I'm not assuming anything, but my guess is with this changing economy, that our reserve funds and fund balances that are available to be invested, we're shifting as much as we can to higher return CDs. And
Yes.
now that we're getting 5% plus out there versus 0.25%,
Yes.
for example, but is that happening?
Well, my understanding is that we've had some in longer term, they're fixed rates for a term, but as they're maturing, yes, they're getting put into higher rate investment.
Well, thank you for your feedback on that format, and I just want to acknowledge our team for putting that together. We're trying to be thoughtful and comprehensive, but we also don't want to create a report that's so detailed that it's really hard to navigate. So we hope that this kind of hits at that strategy level that the commission is looking for. But if there's format ideas or suggestions as we move forward, we're more than happy to make changes and modifications to that information. So I'll be taking page 5, and let me just start at the highest of levels and just talk about what Commissioner Preston was just highlighting, and that is really the need in 2024 and beyond to look at realistic revenues and realistic expenditures. That's really my mantra for 2024, making sure that we have no major one-time surprises for revenues that don't produce, a property sale that doesn't occur, but we also identify stable revenue, stable expenditure reductions if at all possible, so that we are trying to keep as level as we can. We really want to be very careful with our prioritization, as well as I've met with departments, and those discussions are ongoing. As I've met with commissioners, we certainly want to be thoughtful, but we also want to be as conservative as possible in our approach, knowing that we have a lot of demands. Jill's going to talk about the personnel demands in the general fund, and to try to balance our interests in growing modestly, elements of the organization that need to grow, such as the staffing for Fire Station number 8. We also need to be thoughtful in our long-range planning for 2025, 2026, 2027, et cetera, about when we kind of plan for other staffing increases and additions. So let me just briefly highlight below just a few other processes as well as forecasts. The one piece I've heard very clearly, as I stated earlier from commissioners, is that we look at longer range strategy, and Jill is going to talk a bit about that. We want to be predictive rather than reactive. I think that we can certainly help the commission of today and the commission of tomorrow understand what's coming on the horizon line. I think that's just a real gift to the policy board to make sure that you're not surprised that in 2028, if there's a need for Fire Station number 9 or for a police hire or for public works or health, that we have that well documented and well understood. We also are going to be looking at additional projects and programs, trying to make sure that they align strategically, to what the commission would like to achieve in 2024 and beyond. But very briefly, on the public safety side, fire is going to be the priority. We need to staff a new fire station that will be brought online later in 2024. That will be a number of new personnel positions that need to be filled and recruited to the organization. We're also going to modestly look at some staff augmentations where possible in the police department as well as in other areas. And so we're not going to go line by line. We're going to save some of that conversation for 2 weeks with the mayor's presentation on July 24. But all this to say that we are really being thoughtful and methodical on trying to think about what we can accomplish and what we can achieve. And so I thought it'd be helpful just to kind of take a high-level summary of that, and Jill's going to help with that. The HR department is, I think, going to be giving us a great framework for the future so that we have something that is sort of purpose-built for those out years, so that we're not just doing this in isolation calendar year by calendar year, but rather looking at a longer-range staffing analysis to really staff the organization for success. So I'll have Jill speak to that briefly, and then we're going to come back and talk about some remaining strategies for 24.
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon. So we are really trying to focus on the concept of staffing for success, and what does that mean for us as a city, and what does that mean, within each department? So we're trying to understand what the occupational or industry norms are for each department in staffing. For example, if there are benchmarks where staffing is based on the budget, or staffing is based on the number of employees, or based on population, that allows us to do comparisons with what other like type, similar in scope organizations, cities across the country or across the region are doing for staffing as well. And again, really helps us understand to be successful in delivering both organizationally the services we expect, but also the services that the community has come to expect. What levels of staff do we need to really sustain those great services? So we've been in the process of gathering that information, again, hoping that it allows us to make more strategic, data-driven decisions and identify where we have those gaps. So as Mike said, for the future, we have an idea of what our maybe even 5+ year plan would look like, what those needs will be. Of course, it's going to be ever evolving as the community grows and as needs change, but it will give us a bit more of a long-term look than what we currently have today. And so we have approximately 68 positions that have been requested through the general fund. We're continuing to look at that, but as Mike said, fire being the priority, looking at 15 FTEs, and then police with some potential grant funding as well. So we're looking at each department's request and looking at kind of a low to high scenario, and where those priorities lie for those future approvals. And then I just want to talk briefly from an overall compensation standpoint, looking at our pay and benefits. As you know, it's important to be competitive within especially that market area from which we're recruiting for any given position. So we've engaged MRA, our compensation consultants, to review our overall pay structure, looking at the last market survey that we completed, as well as just current market trends, to help us determine if we need to make changes to our pay structures. So we should have that information back, we hope in the next couple of weeks here, and can take a closer look and determine if now is the right time to make any adjustments, or if we have that information for future years. We're also looking at other pay types like longevity pay. It's been a number of years since any changes have been made to longevity pay. So we're looking, as we looked throughout the region when we did our market survey last year, we saw that we're really lagging in terms of longevity pay. So, the hope is to increase those levels by $25 a month for each of the levels, and then look to the next year or two to potentially do another increase again to get us more competitive within the region. We also found that other employers are starting that longevity pay earlier. And in today's market, we think this is really an important tool in helping with our retention efforts to start that longevity pay even earlier. So those are, that's just one of the things that you'll see in the budget in a couple of weeks is how we might look at certain pay types like longevity pay, again, to support retention overall. And that would expand the number of employees, almost double the number of employees that would be receiving longevity pay. So that's everything I have, unless there are any questions.
Well, thank you, Jill. And
But Michael, bear with me one second. Jill, I'm not sure which, but inside of all of these processes, we have changes coming too with pensions. And does that, just to update me, when does that kick in and how are we approaching the shift and when to defined contributions from defined benefits?
Yes, so we will be, or NDPERS will be shifting from defined benefit to defined contribution. I'm not sure if that's been finalized as a 24 effective or 25 effective, so we need to follow up on that. But I do anticipate that that will have a significant impact on especially retention of future staff, but even on the recruiting side, you know, where someone comes in, if a pension or that retirement is really important to them, we now aren't going to have that maybe competitive edge over a private sector. So we are going to have to continue to monitor especially pay and our other benefits very closely to make sure that we are staying competitive in those arenas. Of course, police and fire will still have their pension plans, but all of our other employees will no longer have a defined benefit or pension type plan.
And Jill, just for commissioners, we talk about market studies and how often you do them for all our employees. It seems now we're getting kind of some departments are suddenly reacting right away to market issues. Can you just explain when do you normally do a market survey and then what happens if a certain department has to accelerate?
Yes. Yeah. So routinely, we're doing our large regional survey every 3 years. There was a time when that was frequent enough, right? Occasionally we had to look at data between those surveys, but in today's market and compensation really moving very quickly, we are doing those kind of individual position or departmental market surveys much more frequently than what we used to. So our large citywide survey, we still have set for a 3-year cycle, but we just last year, as you probably recall, had to looked at equipment operators. The year before was equipment technicians. Right now, looking at maintenance technicians, those hard to fill positions. So we are routinely working with leadership teams to understand what we need to do in terms of pay to be competitive locally.
we really appreciate the assistance of the HR department in helping us navigate all of these position requests. We know that in a growing community, we're going to continue to have these demands as we have grown a lot in our population as well as the geographical footprint of the community. And so we just want to be thoughtful long-term on a methodical approach that says this is what we need and when we need it. So we think that that could be a really, really good tool for us to return to in the future. So more to follow on that. I just want to make a couple of other highlight points before turning it over to Brenda on some other remarks. But the other piece that we're going to accommodate within the budget is all of these various community planning activities regarding housing, the Core Neighborhood Master Plan implementation. There's a variety of activities and professional services that will be underway in the planning department. We're going to do as much as we can in that space. And then one piece that we're working with the facilities management group is asset preservation. That's a term that is certainly not new in large state government institutions like higher education. But asset preservation, we think, is going to be really important for us too, because we know that our facility stock is, in some cases, relatively new, like this building. And then in other cases, it's aging, and it's aging pretty rapidly. And so we need to be really thoughtful about capital plans and programs that are looking at preserving what we have so that we're not prematurely having to decommission a building that could otherwise be invested in today in 2024 and 2025. And then finally, too, we're going to be doing some analysis with all of our staff groups, but particularly some that we know that are community-facing, as well as with the commission, about the kind of general service level of expectation. We highlighted a few. We know that you get outside of the public safety departments this year, it's going to be very difficult for us to grow our staffing levels. And so we will have some pretty frank conversations about expectations and about what we're able to deliver in some of the other service areas. And we just highlighted a few here for you as well. But I thought would it be helpful too to just talk a bit about utilities and about some of our transfer strategies. Brenda's done some analysis with our staff looking at the enterprise funds. We could talk about that briefly, and then I just have a couple of comments and closeout before we turn it over to the commission for feedback on revenue and expenditures, but I'll turn it over to Brenda to talk a bit about our bill rates as well as utility rates for 2024.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. So I've been working on our utility rates, and so we have quite an array of different utilities that we have our rates for and our enterprise groups. And so we have a few that are still growing and maturing. And so we are looking at doing a couple of rate increases. One would be our streetlight and traffic this year, and then along with forestry. So we have 3 utilities that are really relying on other income sources to help make them mature. And so we'll be looking at that. And then strategically working with finance is, can we get our arms around how often are we reviewing them, and trying to get more of a schedule of review on those utility rates so that we understand when we will be seeing them. Because right now we've got, everyone's pretty much set on when they would look at a new rate increase, but if we can get that out and look at that strategic planning more visibly, then we have an idea of what's coming down the road.
And finally, I just wanted to add a note. Susan talked about this earlier, but the limitations of our technology have been well documented and well known. We really look forward to moving forward with some technology enhancements that will make this information development and sharing more fruitful for you, and I think more comprehensive for you. We want to be able to be as responsive as possible, so that ERP is also on deck for this next year. That'll be a long duration project. If there are any questions about that, we can certainly address those questions today. But just know that that is one that will be not only of utility and use for the commission of today, the staff of today, but we're talking about several years after that. Those are durable systems that last a long time and will replace legacy systems that, as Susan mentioned, have been really antiquated for at least 10 or 20 years, if not longer than that, and we've continued to limp along. So we think that will be a much, much needed improvement and will help you do an even better job with financial forecasting and revenue projections. And then I just again want to acknowledge Jill and the HR team. Jill really covered that last topic there, just about where we're at on finding the optimum staffing levels. But just really appreciate all of the input and the feedback the commissioners have provided to date on revenue and on expenditures. We certainly want to be as responsive as we can to you. And so in advance of the mayor's budget presentation, in 2 weeks, that's 2 weeks from today, on July 24. If there are other thoughts and perspectives, we certainly want to include them and just have conversation with you today as well, just on your thoughts and perspectives on revenue, for example. So thank you for the time.
The one reason we want to have this meeting today is what we want to kind of get into a little bit with you as commissioners is we have to look at long-term sustainability. Is how are we going to sustain the good services we give to the community, and a long-term debt management, a long-term how we do everything together. I think what we want to try to do is not just look 1 year, but we want to look several years from now of do we have the right model and then we set it up the right way. Difficulty with the city of Fargo is we continue to grow Forestry is a good example, is before you had trees that weren't mature, they're mature now, so they have more ground to cover. You know, the same thing as fire, police, everybody has more miles to cover. And there's services that people have expected in our community, they still want that to happen. Well, we have to match the expense with revenue to how can we best manage that. So what you're going to see basically in this year's budget, yes, you will see next year, what are we going to do? But it's more look at long term. What model makes our community sustainable in the long term, and to provide all the things we need. We're going to do a Fire Station 8, but it needs people inside of it. So to enhance that service that the community gets, that's what we have to have. Jill, I think, is constantly looking for ways in which we retain our employees, because it costs us so much to hire a new employee, orient, get them ready, get all those things done. But if we can retain the people we have, the better it is. So there is the thing, we would like to be the top 10 employer in the city of Fargo, where people want to come to the city of Fargo and work. And so we always have to look as, are we keeping competitive? Are we keeping our wages? Coal about right? All those different things. So what I'd like on this meeting is basically, it's kind of policy. Let's look at policy and for you to understand what the team tries to do. And if there's some different ideas that you have, feel free to contact Mike or to Susan and talk to her about those things that you think are good. And Brenda likes to work on utilities a bit, so that's part of what she's taken as a challenge this time as well. So there's things in utilities you see that we might change or do different. I would encourage you all to look at the utility model. I think, Denise, you've looked at that, where they have occasional rate increases over time to cover our debt load and cover our services. And I think that best water in the state of North Dakota, right, you have to do certain things to do that. So it would be nice to sometimes look at utilities. And one of the philosophy changes in utilities is we used to rob from other departments. We used to take money from other departments to make another department to be in the black. Now it's kind of been the philosophy, they almost have to stand on their own. And that is challenged sometimes for them to stand on their own, but it has very much to do with rates. What rates should we charge? And no matter what we all want to do, is inflation has hit us and we are dealing with more costs than we've had before. So would like you to look at two items basically around our budget going forward. What is for next year and what is best helps us long-term to stay sustainable as a city, as a budget that anybody can inherit as we go forward. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question? We didn't really address the long-term reserve strategy discussion, and I would very much like to see a policy drafted that's tied to some metrics and some, philosophical and financial methodology. When I was at Blue Cross Blue Shield, we had a very robust reserve strategy, and it's important work from a fiduciary responsibility perspective, and so I would like to see that.
And I think we will do that, but I'd ask for a little forgiveness for the next 2 weeks if we can just get our budget ready for you.
Didn't mean in the next
Yeah.
2 weeks, I'm sorry.
Thank
And
you.
then we'll work it into August, September, we'll start working on that. And then we're probably going to ask some of you to help us with that because it's more of a range we want to get, or insurance, or what a natural disaster might hit us, or what issues we might have. But we do feel we should clean that up, yes.
One of the things I think would be a benefit for everybody would be to ongoingly have a balcony view of the state of the city. Our growths are our challenge, and we need to be having smart growth, but we need to constantly remind ourselves and each other, what is our growth? Where's our growth? How far is our growth going? When's it going to end? What are the implications of these growths and expansions? But we're at 130,000 people now, doubled in 20 years? And the community needs to know the context that we're addressing and facing. What are the realities that come with a growing community and the growing needs, and what are those needs? Otherwise we assume people know it, and they know this narrative, and for our sake, it's constant. I just remind ourselves and each other ongoing that these are our growth expectations of the city, and these are the services and needs that accompany such growth.
If I could just add to that a little bit, I think the growth planning process that we're going through will hopefully help put some definition around that question of, as we grow, how do we maintain sustainability, financial stability in the future. So the economic subcontractor with the growth plan consultants should help us get there. And, you know, we have a couple of items on the agenda tonight where, you know, the whole issue of financing through debt, the infrastructure, and how does the revenue generation from whatever revenue sources we're getting, how does that keep us sustainable in the future? So the other thing, and if I could just bring it up real quickly, we've talked about it in the meetings, and just to bring it up on the public table here, is to understand better the debt management side of all of this. Certainly the debt side of the general fund, but also the overall debt picture, and to understand that a little bit better. Again, not in the next 2 weeks, but at some point in the future.
Well, Commissioners, we really appreciate your time today, and importantly, we thank you for your time in advance of this meeting today as well. This has really been helpful for us, and just want to thank our team as well for putting together the information that's been assembled to date. If there's other inputs that you have over the next couple of weeks that can help inform our approach and our strategies, we're certainly open to that. And so I just want to thank you for all of the investment of time. And, you know, I think this is an area that we certainly acknowledge, and it was made clear to me too that we just desire a little bit more kind of ground level look at how the budget is constructed. So hopefully we're delivering on that for you this year in 2024. So if you have other thoughts and feedback about how we improve this in the future, we certainly want to be available for that. And I'll look forward to the presentation in a couple of weeks.